Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Attending college is part of the American dream, but today, is that dream attainable? With recent tuition increases, are we pricing people out of the market? And how will these public institutions survive the current budget crisis? What is the future for higher education? Join the discussion. Dialogue is next. Hello, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations. The U.S. is currently 12th among major industrialized countries in higher education attainment. Worse, Idaho is 43rd in the nation for the number of ninth graders who go on to finish college. Why? Well, a lot of it has to do with money. Nationally, on average, higher education costs have gone up 76% in 10 years. And since its peak appropriation in 2009, Idaho's universities and colleges have seen an approximate $66 million cut in their state general fund support. In turn, university presidents called for yet another round of tuition increases just to maintain what is supposed to be a public institution. So tuition's going up, class sizes are increasing, programs are being cut. If you're in college now or heading that way, what can you expect to find? And when you get out, what can you hope for? On a bigger scale, if the funding crisis continues, will Idaho's higher education system even survive? Joining me in our Moscow studio to discuss the future of higher education and the future of the class of 2010 are three of the student body presidents from Idaho's major colleges and universities. Kelby Wilson is from the University of Idaho. Ross Knight is from Idaho State University, and Clay Long is from Lewis Clark State College. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me there in Moscow.
Thank you, Joan.
Thanks for having us.
And of course, we want to hear from you. Give us a call toll free at 1-800-973-9800. And just so you BSU fans aren't feeling left out, they've just elected a new student body president, Stephen Helker, and he could not join us this evening. But I appreciate the gentleman. You're up there in Moscow for the state board meeting, is that correct?
Yes, we are.
That's correct. Yeah.
And it's your last one, because the three of you are about to step down from this position. Did anything happen at the state board meeting today?
They approved the healthcare consortium, so now ISU, BSU, and LCSC will merge our healthcare plan so we can save students money.
That's a good thing.
Very good thing, especially in these times.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the money. All three universities had an increase in their tuition. How big a burden has that been for students on your three campuses? Let's start with you, Kelby.
It will be somewhat of a burden. It's about $468 at the University of Idaho for the next school year, which is about 1 to 2 months rent or a semester's worth of books. So hopefully that burden can be filled in with federal financial aid. I know the university has increased scholarship dollars about 15% this last fiscal year, about $800,000. So we're doing what we can to help people out. But it is a burden. It is a significant amount of change.
Okay, Clay, how about at LCSC?
LCSC students are going to see an increase in about just over $400 of what they're going to pay from this year to next year. And I mean, again, that's a couple books for your upper division courses, rent for a month. It just depends on where you're living on campus or off campus, but for the most part, they're going to see it. It's an amount of money that we wish that we didn't have to come up with that extra money, and in an effort for us to continue to receive the education that we have become accustomed to and the quality that we have. It's one of those things that between administration and students and faculty, that's kind of the lowest number we could go with in order to ensure those successful programs.
And Ross, how about ISU?
ISU, the tuition increase is going to be about $450 next year for the students coming in, and it is going to be a big burden for the students, and especially like Clay was saying, it's rent for a month. I mean, that's cuts into your food, it cuts into your living expenses, and so yes, it's definitely going to be harder, and with less financial aid and more debt just makes it harder in the long run too. So it's definitely going to be difficult.
To put it in perspective, tuition at the Idaho's major institutions somewhere between $16,000 and $18,000 for a full year for room and board, cost of attending the school. That's a lot of money, even on in-state tuition.
It's very true.
Do you feel like the legislature was very strong about not wanting to raise taxes, but they did allow tuition to be raised. Is this a question of they're just shifting more and more of the cost on the backs of the student and less as a public institution, a publicly supported institution?
I think you have it right there perfect, that we don't want to increase the taxes that everyone's going to pool together for, but make those users that are paying for the system be the ones that are ultimately paying for that. And if we have a public education system, then the majority of those should continue to be funded by tax dollars and the revenue from the state general fund. And as we look at the years over the past few years and those amounts that have changed and went down or went up, it seems like anytime there's a shortfall, we just continue to put it more and more on the students without going back when the years are good and reducing the cost of tuition.
Did you see that the legislature had any other choice this particular session?
I think there were ways they could have generated some revenue. Had that been something like a hotel tax, making better use of our endowed lands, an overall sales tax increase, although a sales tax increase is quite regressive for a tax. There were options. If the economy is as bad this coming year, I think they'll have to go to those options to generate more revenue to support higher education and K-12 education in this state.
Now let's see, Clay, you're the one that's going to be graduating in just a few weeks. You're part of that class of 2010. What do you see on the other side?
Well, I'm in the midst of applying for graduate school and trying to hear back from them. And in the meantime, just out looking for jobs and applying for jobs. In fact, I actually sent 2 applications in today during the state board meeting for a couple of jobs that I had found that were open. So, but it's it's one of those things where I don't really know where I'm gonna end up, and I hope that with my investment in my education that it pays off, and it pays off quick, and I don't have a long waiting time from here until I find a job.
How about for you, Kelby and Ross? I'm sorry, you both are a little ways away. You're both seniors, but you're almost there. What are you looking at when you finish college?
When I'm finished with college, I'll be looking at graduate school, and hopefully, when I'm done, find a job and start looking for work like Clay is doing now. But hopefully, it's a smooth transition from my undergraduate to graduate school.
And I have quite a bit of school left. I plan on going on to medical school after finishing up my degree at the University of Idaho next year, and then residency. So it'll be about 8 years before I actually enter the workforce, and with medicine, I should be able to find a job.
Well, the three of you represent a growing trend in graduating seniors. Studies show that more students are going on to graduate school because they don't think they're going to find jobs, and that there's money to continue in school. You can get student loans, and you can put off having to start pay back those student loans. Are students having to decide that graduate school is their only option because the real world's too scary?
I don't. I think that one of the most important parts, along with your education, is definitely going to be the experiences that you have. And I think the degree will get you in the door, and the degree will set the ceiling on how far you can move. But I think it's going to be, the experiences intermingled with the education that's going to make students successful in the future after they graduate from college, whether it be with a bachelor's degree or even an associate's or a master's or PhD. I think it's definitely a combination of those things, and the more opportunities students get involved with to take on leadership positions, the better off they're going to be in the end.
Why do you think so few Idaho students are going on to finishing college? We're 43rd in the nation. What is it that's keeping kids from finishing college?
I think there's a lot of opportunities for students if you look at trade, especially in Idaho, where a majority not a majority, but a lot of those people are living on farms, and so they want to just continue on to that. And the more and more available programs within the high school with professional technical education and those certificates they can attain before they even graduate from college will help and make them employable. And you know, if they can't afford it and their parents can't afford it, then they're not going to be able to go on to college. And I think that is one thing that will make a deciding factor for a family whether or not they're going to send a student on to college or not.
Well, if you earn less than if your family makes less than $34,000 a year, you have to spend 43% of your income to keep someone in college if you don't have full ride and scholarships. That's a pretty big chunk to ask someone to give up to go to school.
That is a big chunk, but I think that most of the students that are coming to higher education in this state are receiving aid of some sort. I don't have the exact numbers on that, but I know the vast majority of University of Idaho students receive a scholarship of some shape and form. Granted, the size of that scholarship can vary from a couple $100s to a couple $1,000s.
But
and I think it's difficult.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think it's difficult too in Idaho, where a lot of our income base is lower than a lot of other places. That to transition from high school to spending that large percentage of your household's income on education is hard to justify in a lot of ways.
Well, let's get a caller in here. Mitchell, I think it is, or Michelle. Is it Michelle?
Michelle.
I'm sorry, Michelle from Nampa. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I am calling because I am a graduating senior. I am how do you say this? A non-traditional student. I'm a 38-year-old woman. I have worked really hard to graduate and get to this point. And I am graduating with a 3.4 GPA, never gotten a scholarship, and I now have student debt of $45,000.
Wow.
I think that education is being priced out. I'm terrified. I have student debt coming up that I have no idea how I'm going to pay, and the job market is terrible. So basically, I went to college to improve my situation, and I'm scared that I've done my family more financial harm than good. So I think there needs to be some changes. We're told all our lives that college is how to get there, and that may not be the case anymore.
Well, that's a good question for the three of you. You represent the students at your schools. Is college still the best option? And thank you, Michelle.
College, university really is the only option in a lot of ways, at least according to statistics. I mean, your income increases substantially with a college education, but having to weigh that out now with the increasing costs of that is hard to do. And so, yeah, and the debt load's just increasing as our tuition goes up more and more.
Now, Ross, you were
transferred.
You were part of a group of students that came to Boise to protest at the legislature. What kind of a response did you get?
That's correct, yes. The response, it's hard. The response was it's hard. It's hard to weigh out all the different people that need money, and how do we justify giving education more money than health and welfare or what the other organization that's asking for it as well. And so we'd like to help you, but there's really nothing that we can do. And so that was unfortunately the answers that we got going to Boise.
So what was your response?
That we need to start looking at other options. We need to start looking for options to help fund education. The only way that Idaho is going to succeed in the long run is by improving our educational system and rising from the bottom of the national standings and excelling instead of falling behind farther and farther. And we have to look beyond just the short term of the bad economy and look for what's going to actually lead us into the future and what's the road out, and impressing upon them the need of education as that road out of our economic situation and the way that we improve Idaho as a state.
Let's get...
one of the things...
Oh, sure, go ahead.
as we were sitting in the lobby waiting to come in, I was looking at some of the stats that were presented at the last state board meeting. Just comparing fiscal year 1990 to fiscal year 11, and the change in higher education budget of a 9.1% right now of the overall state budget to 14.9 in 1990, and to know the amount of students different from what we are serving now to what we're serving then, it's almost, I mean, obviously it's going the opposite direction of the way it should be. If we're going to impact more students and educate more students, then there has to be more funding. I also looked at the amount of overall budget that juvenile and adult corrections is spending. And in 1990 that was 3.2%, and now it's up to 7.6%. And I just find that correlation quite interesting with those two amounts, and how the more and more we digress from higher ed and spending for higher ed, and even public education, the higher and more expenses we have in the Department of Corrections.
A lot of people say there's a big tie between how much we spend for early childhood education and public schools, and the amount we have to spend for corrections. One of the reasons politicians say kind of in those offhanded ways, 18-year-olds don't vote. If I'm going to have someone, I'm going to have 16 constituents demanding their slice of the pie, these group of people don't show up to vote. How are you going to get people who go to college, pay those tuitions, that 18 to 25 group, to actually get out and make their, stretch their political muscles?
The way that it's going to happen is because of the impact that it's beginning to have on their education and them succeeding long term in their lives. And as they see themselves priced out of their education, it's going to push more of that advocacy and more pressure we put on our representatives to impact the changes that we need to see.
Let's get another call in here. Mario from Boise. Mario, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question. You see, the cost of being an electric technician was 3 years ago $37,000 without room and board, and this is increasing now. Now, the salary of the football coach of BSU is going up to $1 million plus all the deals that he can make on the side. Why is this?
Well, gentlemen, do you want to take a stab at that, or do you want me to?
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Because I believe the state board approved Coach Peterson's contract, and now Coach Peterson doesn't. There are no tax dollars used to pay Coach Peterson, so that's the one argument BSU makes. Though that shouldn't be impacting the college tuition. So just put that part out of it. But how, in terms of fighting within the university, are there programs that are surviving and not surviving, and is that what's going to happen? They're just going to have to. The small programs are going to have to give way to the bigger programs? As
the state devalues education or reduces its funding towards education, then it will become which programs are profitable to the university to run. And if the program isn't bringing in revenue, then, and it's not being subsidized to offer the program, then the universities are going to be forced to make some very tough decisions when it comes to the program offerings that the students see when they register for classes.
I know athletics is a sore subject for a lot of students as far as the amount of money that's being spent on those, and even as a student with student fees at LC, I mean, I pay a price tag for, each student does, for the athletics department, whether it's to bring students in for scholarships or for equipment or whatever that may be. And what I hear from the larger institutions especially, I guess, is the revenue that's brought back in from those programs definitely helps cover some of the costs that you wouldn't necessarily from state appropriated dollars or even student tuition. It's one of those, just when you look at CEOs of major companies that are making, $30-40 million, how fair is that really justified? And it's a question that's always going to be asked. And is the $1 million salary bringing back in the amount of money that it's worth to pay that? And obviously the administration and along with the state board feel that that is a need and is a good use of money. I think one of one of my biggest concerns with, higher ed and the price tag is as a graduating senior, even from high school, basically you're encouraged, go on to higher education. There's a lot of Go On campaign. The Albertsons Foundation has put a lot of money into that campaign. And some students may not necessarily want to do that, but that's just what's expected of them, and that's almost like what's the right thing to do. So a student gets into college and they're there for a couple of years and they haven't really made a decision on what they want to do or which way they want to go, and then it just continues on and on and on. And if you're there for 5 or 6 or 7 years, then it's even more of an expense before you really even know exactly what you want to do.
That is tough. Let's go to Glenn in Chalice. Glenn.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment and give my kudos to all three of you guys, especially you, Dalton, and I just wanted to let you know to keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate that.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Let's go to Lucas in Athol. Lucas.
Yeah, my question is have they ever thought about the students that come from overseas and how much financial aid they receive to students who are in the U.S. and how much they receive per year? And if they would cut down on the financial aid for the foreign students and focus more on the students here in the U.S.?
Go for it.
The overall net revenue, we actually want to increase our international students at the University of Idaho. When you take the funding per student that we get from the state for an in-state student and the in-state tuition dollars or matriculation fees in the University of Idaho's case, those are less than what we'd receive from an out-of-state international student. International students typically live on campus too. And so our goal at the University of Idaho is actually to grow our international population, to increase our diversity. We'd like to see about 100 additional international students just because they generate additional revenue and they do provide that diversity on campus.
Yeah, there's a pretty big... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I had an interesting conversation actually at lunch today. I was talking with one of the gals from the financial aid office here from the U of I, and even, those individuals that come from overseas, they, there's a good chance they're going to bring other money in addition to just the tuition fees. That there may be some opportunities for endowments or scholarships or foundation grants or all that additional revenue to help support the other students that come. And like Kelby was saying, when you have a student coming from out of state or overseas that's paying $17,000 for their expenses versus an in-state student that's just over $5,000, that's a pretty big difference, and the cost to the institution is the same price.
Right. We're rapidly running out of time, so if you're on the phone with me, hang in there, and we'll catch your phone calls when we go to the web extra. So hang on the phones if you're on with me. And I want to give each of you a chance. Your terms are almost up. Most of them are first part of May. What did you learn as a student body president this year, and what advice do you want to pass on to the person who's going to take your shoes? So why don't we just go across the table? Why don't we start with Ross on that end, and we'll go on our way over to Kelby.
I've learned mostly that you have to be able to work with other people, and you have to realize that I had to realize that nothing operates in a vacuum, that the decisions that ISU has to make are influenced at the state level, and that if we want to affect change in the future, that we have to be willing to step outside and have conversations with the people that are making the laws and allocating the monies, so that when our children come through, they'll have an education too, and so that we can save the people that are coming in just right behind us from having an increased burden on their education.
Okay, Clay?
The biggest piece of advice I'm going to leave for my successor is just the fact that to make sure you stand up for what you believe in, what you feel is right, and that there's going to be a lot of people that tell you you can't do something or there's a reason why you can't do it. And I have yet to find something this year that I was told I couldn't do that we eventually couldn't do, and work around and find an alternative solution to the problem. And I think it's also important that you have a very cohesive group of people. I mean, the student body presidents in Idaho this year, we've worked together pretty much since the beginning of the year, talking and being in constant communication, and at the state board meetings visiting, and really brainstorming and picking each other's ideas of what's working best at the other institutions and how we can work together. And so that's been very helpful.
Kelby?
And I would have to say relationships, 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 whether that's with your student body and your peers, the students at your school, state legislators, the State Board of Education, your school's administration. As Clay hit on, we had all four-year university and college student body presidents in Boise during Education Week to lobby the state legislature back in January. And so it's all about building relationships, listening to people's concerns, and then taking action and doing as much as you can. As students, we have a lot of power, and oftentimes we don't realize that and we don't exercise that power. And so it's up to the student body presidents to step up to the plate and be the voice for their constituents.
Now, the three of you, as you head toward graduation after grad school, are you going to come back to Idaho to work? I mean, aside from any family ties or sentimental ties, is Idaho a place you want to spend the rest of your life?
I know I want to come back to the Northwest, whether that's Washington, Oregon, or Idaho. I'd like to practice medicine in a small rural community, and hopefully I get into the WWAMI program and get a residency in Idaho and stick around here in Idaho. That's what I'd like to do.
And I don't really have a strong feeling one way or another. I love Idaho, and I've enjoyed growing up and living here my whole life. And if the jobs are here, I am definitely planning on staying, and we'll just see how things go. But I don't have anything pushing me out from Idaho, I guess, for sure.
Ross?
Yeah, and yes, we plan on staying in Idaho as long as we can find work, and the place has been very good to us thus far, and so, yeah, Idaho would be a great place to stay in the long run.
Well, that seems to be the key. If there are jobs abound, then we'll get to keep our people here, or keep our young people in Idaho.
That's very true.
Any last minute advice, any thoughts on before you leave? Here's your chance to tell Idaho what you think.
Our leaders, both in this state and in this nation, the U.S. is 12th, and then Idaho is low in the U.S., need to make higher education a priority if we want to maintain an educated populace and stay at the cutting edge of technology and science and the future of our global economy and our global world.
Yeah, we have to be visible. We have to get out, and we have to, as we said earlier, start voting. And just make a voice for higher education.
All right.
Be that voice for higher education in the future.
And Clay, I'm going to have to cut you off.
And relationships. Oh.
Relationships. Well, gentlemen, thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to appear tonight. Thanks again to Kelby Wilson, Ross Knight, and Clay Young. Thank you, gentlemen. If you want to learn more about the future of higher education or more about the state's colleges and universities, go to the Dialogue website. There you'll find more information, links, and our web-only conversation. Go to idahoptv.org, click on Dialogue. You'll find us on Facebook and YouTube, so check it out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time here on Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web.